afternoon and welcome to cck-law.com. My name is Robert Chisholm and I'm here with Courtney Ross. And we're here to give you an update on the NDAA 2021, the National Defense Authorization Act, as it relates to some new presumptive conditions for herbicide exposure. So a measure was included in the final version of the National Defense Authorization Act to grant Department of Veterans Affairs benefits to tens of thousands of Vietnam War veterans suffering from the effects of Agent Orange. Every year, Congress passes the National Defense Authorization Act. It's a policy and spending bill for the Defense Department that goes through Congress every year. And recently, the one for 2021 was finalized after a veto by the president. The veto was overridden by Congress. So that law has now been enacted. What does this change mean for veterans? Courtney, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about what conditions were added. And what's unique about this, I think, is that Congress years ago, when it passed the original Agent Orange Act, authorized the Secretary to add conditions over time by regulation. But here Congress stepped in and said, we're adding these three conditions because the Secretary of Veterans Affairs had not done it. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Robert. So as Robert said, new conditions have been added to VA's list of conditions that they consider presumptively due to exposure to Agent Orange for Vietnam veterans. These three conditions include bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, and Parkinson's-like symptoms. So symptoms like tremors, slow movement, impaired speech, muscle stiffness, symptoms that are similar to Parkinson's without actually having the Parkinson's diagnosis are included on the presumptive list now as well. And what is so important about this is that for any, generally speaking, for service connection, veterans have to prove three elements. They have to show a current diagnosis of a condition, an in-service event or occurrence or symptoms, and then a third element, a medical nexus, linking that current diagnosis to their service. For conditions that are on VA's presumptive list, veterans don't have to show that third element. So they no longer need that medical nexus for now bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, and Parkinson's-like symptoms. So it makes establishing service connection and getting entitlement to those benefits essentially easier for veterans because there's one less element to prove. And so they now only have to show a diagnosis of bladder cancer and then their service in Vietnam, which makes them eligible for presumptive exposure to Agent Orange as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Courtney, because in the past, when we have represented veterans who were exposed to herbicides in Vietnam, for example, who had bladder cancer, we would have to go out and obtain a medical report from a private physician most times linking the condition. And we were able to win some of those claims. Now that's no longer necessary, which makes it a lot easier for veterans. Is there any kind of estimate as to how many veterans will receive this benefit or will this easing of the standard of proof, if you will, by this presumption?
Yeah, so one senator's office estimated around 34,000 Vietnam veterans are going to fall within this category where they have had these three diagnoses and now are going to be eligible for presumptive service connection. And so obviously that's a really significant number of veterans. And that's just Vietnam veterans too. So, keeping in mind too, and we can talk about this later in the broadcast, but this might benefit other veterans who served in other areas of what as well, if there was exposure to Agent Orange.
Okay. Are these three conditions now, these diseases part of the Nehmer class?
Yes, and the Nehmer class is veterans who served in Vietnam and suffer from what VA has identified as a presumptive condition. And so now that these three conditions have been added to that list, veterans who suffer from one of the three of these will be considered part of the Nehmer class.
Okay. And so what that means is if someone had previously filed for one of these conditions and been denied, they might be able to get an effective date back to the original claim then.
Exactly.
Good. The other thing I think it's important to point out, and you just hinted at this, is that herbicides were used in other locations than just Vietnam. We know, for example, that they were used in Korea. We know that they were used in Thailand. So these conditions would also apply to people exposed to herbicides in those locations as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And usually in some of those other places, there's the added step of having to maybe prove or establish exposure, but you still don't have that third element of needing the medical nexus. And so it benefits those veterans as well.
So it was kind of a long and winding road to add these three conditions, unfortunately. The evidence was there, I think, in 2016, based upon some reports that the Secretary of Veterans Affairs would usually have relied on to add these conditions like this, once it reaches what they call the limited or suggestive evidence linking Agent Orange to, for example, bladder cancer or to Parkinson's-like symptoms. There was more evidence in 2018 study, but what happened here was Secretary Wilkie refused to propose a new regulation adding these three conditions. So Congress took it upon themselves to mandate it by statute, which is a good thing for veterans, especially veterans suffering from these three conditions. So at this point, the NDA 2021 has become law. What advice do we have for people that might be suffering from these conditions that were exposed to herbicides in Vietnam or elsewhere?
The first thing I would say is to file a claim. If you are suffering and have been diagnosed with one of these conditions, get the claim in the door immediately. As we talked about before, if you're a Nehmer class veteran, there's potential for earlier effective dates, but the earlier you get the claim in, the earlier you can get a grant of service connection and then deal with the effective date issues and put it on VA's radar that you're currently might fall in this class of Nehmer class veterans.
I think it's also important to point out that this would apply to the Blue Water Navy veterans as well, those who were exposed to Agent Orange in the waters offshore of Vietnam. So they're part of the people that would benefit from this potentially as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point.
I think that's all we have for now. Anything, last thoughts, Courtney?
No, I think I just want to say this is, like Robert said, it's been a long, winding road to get these three conditions added. And so I think it's exciting to finally see them on the list, and just want to make sure veterans are out there who are suffering from them are aware and to get their claims filed.
I agree. I think if you have these conditions and were exposed to herbicides, you should definitely file a claim. And if you've already filed the claim, hopefully it'll be granted soon and get back to the original effective date when you filed your claim. Courtney, thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is Robert Chisholm and Courtney Ross signing off from cck-law.com. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you.